Hello everyone out there in YouTube land, D here again, back with another video. In this one I will be continuing me reading of Unbirthday, A Twisted Tale. We last left off with Alice discovering that the nonsensical world of Wonderland might be real after all, seen through the lens of a camera. She saw when she took a self-portrait, and developed that film, she saw something very disturbing. Herself, chained, asking for help. What the heck is going on? Well, let's see if we can find out. Chapter 4. Alice almost dropped the plate. The image didn't move again. She was frozen, that other girl, screaming or grinning eternally with her hideous missive. Alice's heart thudded loudly with its double cage of ribs and corset. The house around her was silent, and the light didn't change. But somehow she felt that everything had shifted when she wasn't looking. Opposite versions of the same emotion pulled in her belly. Fear that the house had transformed into an expanded, nightmarish, or wonderlandy version of itself, and fear that it hadn't. She looked around. It hadn't. On the walls, the pictures were all the same. On the floor, the rugs were the same. The furniture, everything the same. "Merry Unbirthday," Alice breathed. In spite of the hideousness of the image as a whole, it was obvious the reason for it. Perhaps the reason for all of the Wonderland images was this written message. A message for her, real-world Alice, from this wretched counterpart. Who was she exactly? Alice closed her eyes and tried to remember. Who looked like her, even for a little, from the other world? She recalled something about the White Rabbit, the one who had started everything. He never let her catch him, and he didn't even seem to see Alice as a distant human being. He always confused her with someone named Mary Ann. That girl seemed to be his servant, and responsible for the white gloves he was constantly missing. Was this she? Was this Mary Ann? Alice ran her finger along the bottom of the picture, the edge of the banner, thinking about unbirthdays. The Mad Hatter had said that she only had one birthday a year, so that left 364 other days to celebrate unbirthdays. But what has that to do with anything? Alice wondered. It wasn't the Mad Hatter greeting her, nor anyone else from the tea party. This was someone she didn't know, and no tea was involved, and it certainly didn't look merry. It was a mystery, or a puzzle rather, she said thoughtfully. Weren't there puzzles in Wonderland? Getting yourself the right size to fit through a door, eating or drinking the right thing for the intended effect? Alice knelt on the ground in front of the sofa and took out all the photographs, laying them carefully next to each other on the soft velvet surface like a very slow game of solitaire. All the Wonderland residents looked upset, nervous, scared. The birds looked particularly spooked. It was a little hard to tell with the Hatter, because he wasn't even looking at the camera. But why wasn't he? The flower seemed as if it was ducking its head, trying not to be seen. And the caterpillar didn't look as smug as Alice initially thought. She had been rewriting the image with her own memories. His eyes wasn't haughty. They were sad and old. And wait! She squinted at the clouds around his head and hands, the almost recognizable shapes. There was something very odd about them. If she had a decent projector or enlarger, she could have had a better look. But that was one piece of equipment her aunt hadn't acquired yet. And Alice, always a good girl, didn't like to push. She jumped up and ran to her aunt's secretary and dug around his drawers and compartments frantically. Somewhere, Vivian had a beautiful magnifying glass with a rosewood handle and cabochons of jet set around the outside. But it wasn't there. The closest thing Alice could find was an old monocle left by one of her aunt's more dapper friends. So she dutifully put it on as best she could. It was actually quite astonishing how well it worked. Hazy shapes would resolve themselves into letters as they had when the caterpillar had been teasing her so mercilessly. She could almost hear his voice again. Help us. The clouds seemed to swirl. Alice couldn't tell if it was the magic of the Wonderland pictures or just her eyes tearing up from the use of the monocle. Unbirthday, she murmured. Help us. She rubbed her head and scratched her eyebrow above the monocle. Help them what? Sitting back on the floor, she looked out the window at the sky and the day as if to find an answer there. The afternoon was developing into a luxuriously warm and sleepy early summer hug. While she was in a darkened, smoking room worried about creatures she had thought were just from a dream, there was probably a girl out there in the park happily waving a daisy chain into a crown, just like Alice had when she... Oh! She suddenly cried. It was a day very much like this when I fell asleep and dreamt of Wonderland. She went to her satchel and fumbled around until she found the journal in which she kept her film and exposure observations. It was a slim, leather-bound book printed with all sorts of useful information in the front, including a nearly perpetual 20-year calendar, as well as recipes for homemade salves and lotions. The tiny numbers on the mostly decorative calendar were nearly impossible to decipher. Once again, the monocle proved its use. I do believe it was May when I went to the park with Mathilda for my lessons years ago. Early May. It was Thursday. I remember that clearly because I wanted to tell Mother and Father of all of what I dreamed, the adventures that happened to me, but they had gone to dine with the Rutherfords as they did every Thursday. So I had tea in the nursery and had to tell Mrs. Anderby about it instead. The poor dear. And darn it, too. She squinted and finally found the date. Oh, my stars, it was today. Exactly today. 11 years ago. She wrinkled her nose, a habit both her sister and her mother tried to break her of, but Alice swore it helped her think, like calluses for her brain. 11. That's a prime number, and a strange anniversary. Why didn't they come to me at 10 or 5? That would have been far more traditional. But, of course, this is Wonderland we're talking about. She regarded all her old acquaintances laid out on the cards. They looked back at her, scared and miserable, and the Queen of Hearts looked insane and triumphant. Sorry about the pause there. Alice shuddered, remembering how terrifying the tiny little woman had been. Despite her size and ridiculous behavior, really quite unacceptable and inappropriate behavior in any adult, much less a member of royalty, she was terrifying. Because whatever she said actually happened if her kinder, gentler husband King was around to stop her. Her servants and call soldiers did whatever she asked. Everyone trembled in fear as she approached. Something is happening in Wonderland. Something bad. That's why they're seeking me now. And it's to do with the Queen of Hearts, Alice said slowly. And it's so very bad that they need my help. The other me seems to be quite indisposed. They're coming all the way to the real world to fetch me. To fetch Alice, the little Alice who had been chased and mocked in Wonderland, the girl who had tried and cried, who sang with the locals but was never really accepted as one of them, who thought about them for years after she woke and then slowly forgot them. They remembered her, apparently, and thought she could do something. I must save them, she decided. She squared her jaw. I must somehow go to Wonderland. I will find the rabbit hole again, or the rabbit, or someone else strange and afraid to chase. She would return to the park. That was the first thing to do. She would find the tree she had climbed while her sister droned on and on from that terribly boring book without any pictures. Of course she was an adult now, and without a chaperone, so things might need to be done a little differently. She grabbed her aunt's golden key from her chair and stuffed it into a satchel for spreading on the ground, as if she were just there for a solo picture. And maybe she would pack a few snacks, both to make it more believable and also to fortify herself for the quest. Well, that's different. Her aunt was suddenly standing in the doorway of the drawing room, an accusing finger leveled squarely at her niece. Alice jumped, knocked out of her thoughts and strangely scared that she and Wonderland had been discovered. Did her aunt suspect something odd was afoot? Did she notice anything was amiss with Alice? Was she upset about Alice borrowing the cape? The monocle, her aunt said, shaking her finger. I love it. A monocle on a girl. Absolutely subverting the whole masculine dandy gestalt. Oh, oh my, you may start a trend. I wonder if I have another one. And with that she spun on her heel, and the forgotten monocle dropped ironically out of Alice's eye, dangling on his long black velvet riband. Alice betook herself to the park post-haste. But the memory of the sunny day, that golden afternoon on which she first glided into Wonderland, was not as precise, detailed, or complete as she hoped. There had been the smell of moisture and sweetness of sun-loving flowers, the floating of insects and dust in the heavy yellow light, the drowsy feeling of all the earth taking her children to warm, comforting arms. There had been the drifting river, the bending reeds, the trees, and the grass, her sister, the boring book, the rabbit. But which was the right tree? Where had she first seen the rabbit? As she stood on one hillock after another, peering at the landscape between the prams, painters, and picnickers, everything seemed different. Well, of course everything seems different, because I opened up like a telescope since then, she said, sighing. I'm over a foot taller. Everything would look different. Unlike the speed in which she changed sides in Wonderland, the creeping of time and aging in this world had come upon her slowly, and yet she was still strangely unprepared. She tried to get down on her knees for a more childlike view, awkward and unseemly. Also, it didn't seem to help. Maybe I should start with the sort of place a rabbit would like, an open meadow, with tasty flowers and buds, next to a thicket, a safe place for running into. With this idea in mind, she straightened her hat, adjusted her bag, and strode off like an intrepid adventuress down a game path in deepest Africa. 2 hours later, and there was still no rabbit. No rabbit holes, or at least no occupied ones. No Wonderland. Only a red and breathless Alice lives with painful feet and aching shoulders. You're here. I know you are, she said, uncaring her. I've seen the pictures. You're real. So come out already. Where are you? I beg your pardon. Did you take secret photos of me after all? Alice spun around, regarding her curiously from farther back on the path was Mr. Katz. He had a faint smile on his lips, but his eyes showed real concern for her odd behavior. His jacket was thrown carelessly over his shoulder, and he had taken his hat off in the warm weather. He had loosened his bright purple cravat, however, and it blazed like the breast of a young, strange robin. No, I wasn't talking to you. I was... Oh, bother. Alice shook her head. It's complicated, and a little mad. Well, now you have me curious. May I accompany you on your perambulations for a bit? I'm rather done it, actually. I've been perambulating for almost 3 hours now looking for a rabbit, or a rabbit hole, or a place where I saw a rabbit once, with my sister. I also sat in a tree. What is this tree? Fire on it. I just can't remember. She sat down wearily at the base of the questionable tree, a lovely oak with long, spreading branches like outstretched arms, amusing and useful for little girls to sit on, unlike the tight, upright oaks along Pilgrim Street that made such tight and narrow acorns. This very well could have been her tree. In her sweat and confusion under Mr. Katz's gay, gently amused look, she realized she had completely forgotten about her clever ruse with the blanket and fake picnic. Now she remembered the little sandwiches and fairy cakes she had packed. She reached in and pulled out a cake, only thinking to break it in two and offer a piece to her companion at the last moment. Thank you. He took it very properly and popped it in his mouth, but seemed more out of politeness than real desire. He squatted on his heels, his back up against the tree. Apparently, like the otherwise proper girl next to him, he was unwilling to sit in the dirt. But what are you doing here, Mr. Katz? Alex asked curiously. A friend of mine asked for help for a friend, in the friendliest way. That sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? But I cut through the park, a long cut, mind you, not a short one, because it is such a beautiful day. Eventually I shall have to follow through on my promise. For now, however, tell me, What's so special about this rabbit, or hole? Alice chewed the cake thoughtfully. What had the little trees in Wonderland tasted like? Sweeter, she thought. Would they be too sweet now? Besides growing up and out, there were other changes in her. Given a choice between a fondant-covered petite four and a bit of fat from a juicy roast, she would choose the latter. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, but I simply must find him. Soon. It's imperative. After a brief rest. Well, all right then. You grab a kip and I'll ward off thieves and suspicious magpies, he offered chivalrously. What about your promise to your friend? And I'm not going to sleep, Alice insisted. I absolutely shouldn't sleep. I feel like I wouldn't wake up for hours and hours. Oh, I keep my promises, Kat said with a reassuring smile. Never fear. Keep me awake then. If you don't mind me delaying your errand for a bit. Tell me something interesting, Mr. Katz. Tell me a story about your life. Tell me about your parents' lives. About coming here, and then having you, and you becoming a barrister. That's quite a lot. Ah, well, I suppose it's interesting enough to some people, but our stories about studying law will keep you awake. How about instead I tell you stories I'll wager you've never heard, about a fantastic city called Chelm, full of fools and madmen. That sounds perfect. I must in fact find a bunch of madmen, Alice said eagerly before she remembered how silly she sounded. Well, as the English are so fond of saying, once upon a time. And here he sat down on the ground finally. It was a little improper, perhaps, having the young man so close to her, but they weren't touching, and there wasn't anything stupidly fantastic and romantic happening like her slowly falling asleep, overcome by the day and leaning up against him. He didn't offer his coat to keep her warm. It was all fine. In the great city of Chelm in Poland, there were many wise men spent their days debating everything from the number of angels who could dance on the head of a pin to how best to save the moon from drowning in the lake at night. One night, the town baker came to the rabbi with a perplexing question. Alice listened as best she could. He spoke clearly with an educated academic accent that sounded like one long accustomed to telling stories. But the day was working its slow magic on her, and she found it hard to concentrate. Instead of keeping her awake and engaged, the story was lulling her dangerously toward a dreamy loss of consciousness. She watched the ducks playing on the edge of the water in the reeds with a diminishing sense of interest in the goings-on of the baker of Chelm and all his in-laws. What pretty rushes the ducks are playing in, she thought as Cass continued the story. I gathered some very sweetly scented ones once while we were rowing. Who is in the party? Mathilda? I cannot remember. But what are the ducks eating? Frogs? Roots? Look at how the river reflects the sky. The water close in reflects the ducks. The sky and the clouds are not changed for being reversed, but the ducks are upside down. Look at that funny upside-down duck glaring at me like it knows something, like it knows anything at all. Silly duck. Well, of course, the duck on the other side of the reflection might know something. Ducks on this side would be different. All the world is made wise and strange in the surface of the river. Oh. She sat up suddenly. The mirror duck was staring right at her, through the water. Help us, it said, rather less beseechingly than peevishly. I heard that, Alice cried. That's it. The river. It reflects the opposite of everything. Contrariwise. She leapt to her feet, and with the energy she hadn't had a moment ago, went racing down the hill toward the ducks. A small part of her was concerned that Cass would stop her. Obviously these were the actions of a sane girl. It probably looked like she was suddenly bent on drowning herself, an English Ophelia. But if he was chasing her, he was too slow and too silent. I see you! You duck there! Don't pretend! She cried, and threw herself into the water. Well, that's it for Chapter 4. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for Chapter 5. It's getting late. And as such, this is Big D signing off, and stay big, everyone.